High Elves are not Blood Elves. Greetings and salutations, Internet. My name is Kindeth, and today we're going to reopen the Pandora's box of the High Elf issue. The reason that this Pandora's box has been reopened is how Ian Hazacostas addressed the Void Elf High Elf question. Now, I intended for this video to originally come out shortly after the Q&A, but I didn't like how it turned out, so I've re-edited it 4 or 5 times. I also had some real-life stuff I was kind of going through. I had just finished college, and I'm working a lot and all that stuff, so I apologize for those that have been waiting for this video that I had promised for so long, and you can expect more regular videos from me in the future. I really do feel like the High Elf topic has been overly talked about, and I don't really want to saturate my channel with High Elf content, but allied races are a big feature of Battle for Azeroth, and I am a lore junkie, and I feel like there's a lore injustice going on in here, especially related to the Alliance, and I feel like there's a misunderstanding on some of the Blizzard developer parts, particularly Ian Hazacostas, in relation to this, which is why I've decided to kind of champion this cause and to make this video. What you're likely to see from me in the future is probably allied race and lore videos. I'm actually working right now on a forest troll allied race video and why it would make sense, so you'll probably see that coming up in the next week. In this video, I'm going to break down why Ian Hazacostas is either wrong, misinformed, or does not understand the High Elf movement. I think that it's important to note before I dive into and dissect this Ian Hazacostas video that I am not personally a High Elf fan. Although I support the High Elf movement and why people want to play High Elves, I myself would not like to play one, so I do not have a horse in this race. I will note, however, that I am an Alliance fanboy. I am somebody who is staunchly Alliance since Warcraft 2, so that no doubt colors my perspective to some degree. However, my issue with this is mainly a lore-related one, as somebody who's more of a lore fanboy than even an Alliance fanboy. And as someone who has played Warcraft games since Warcraft 2, it does feel a little bit weird for ogres to not be a playable race on the Horde side and High Elves to not be a playable race on the Alliance side. Purely from an immersion perspective in the game, and a roleplay perspective in the game. I understand that people that are hardcore Mythic Raiders that are kind of min-maxers are probably not going to care about this issue or any type of lore-related issue, really. They're going to care about how the boss mechanics work and how the racials are going to benefit them in those kind of scenarios. So this video really isn't for those people, and if you're that kind of person, then I understand that you probably don't care much about this. So let's dive right in and take a closer look at this.
Why did you choose Void Elves when High Elves seemed much more of an organic and popular choice?
So basically, Blood Elves kind of are High Elves.
Well, that's interesting, Ian, because in the Three Sisters comic that was released after your question and answers series, Varisa addresses the Blood Elves as the other and says that they can be redeemed, and still seeing herself as a High Elf as she states in the comic. Now, that is just the most recent example, which happens to have come after the question and answer series. But there's multiple other times where Elisande talks to the High Elves as separate from Blood Elves, going all the way back to the Burning Crusade, where Taylor Everstride states that she is a High Elf, not a Blood Elf. So when Ian says, so basically Blood Elves kind of are High Elves, well, if you use that sort of logic, if you break down the entire allied race system, every allied race we've gotten to this point is another race. Nightborn kind of are Night Elves. Void Elves kind of are Blood Elves, straight from Silvermoon, with a little bit of Void corruption. Highmout and Tauren kind of are Tauren. Lightforged Draenei kind of are Draenei, who've just been twinkled by the light, right? Yeah, and it even goes even further with Kultiran humans that are coming out, because Kultiran humans literally are humans. The only thing that separates them from humans is the fact that they eat more sausage, so they've gained more weight. As Blizzard themselves have said in the past, what we play are factions, not the entirety of our races. I don't think anybody here would argue that High Elves are a different faction from Blood Elves, therefore they should be possibly playable. Now, if you don't want to add High Elves, there's probably reasons that you can give, but this isn't one of them. This argument doesn't hold any water.
With slightly different eye color, different backstory in terms of their relationship with magic and the Sunwell.
So what you're hearing here is Ian admitting that they are indeed different, although what he's he's trying to make the argument that the differences are small, but the differences are small between Lightforged Draenei and other Draenei. The only difference is the Lightforged Draenei got onto the Zenidar instead of the Exodar, and then they hung out with the Naru for a little while. And the only difference between the High Mountain Tauren and the other Tauren is the fact that one lives on the Broken Isles and one didn't, and one group of them have antlers and the others don't. So I'm failing to make the connection as to how that somehow cuts High Elves off from being a possible playable race. Let's not forget that we do not live in a Darwinian universe where evolution takes thousands of years. This is a fantasy universe in World of Warcraft where species immediately diverge, such as what happened with the Void Elf transformation, immediately changing them into a different race. Moving on.
A fair-skinned, light blonde-haired, tall, majestic elf that is a blood elf. And giving that race directly to the Alliance, I think, would have blurred a lot of the lines between the two factions.
Except that High Elves are already part of the Alliance, as you can see their NPCs literally everywhere. So are we just going to act like Pandaren didn't happen then? And if that's the case, then why did you give Void Elves to the Alliance, and why did you give Nightborn to the Horde? Because if you put armor on characters, you can't really tell what their skin color is anyway. So there's been many times where I've been running by a Nightborn in Legion thinking that it was indeed a Night Elf. And the same is true for Blood Elves and Void Elves. So this argument doesn't really hold water either. Not to mention the fact that it's completely ignoring the core reason of why people want High Elves. So since I believe that you don't understand why people want High Elves, Ian, I'm going to educate you a little bit on why people do want High Elves. It is for the lore factor. They've been intertwined with the Alliance since forever in the game. Their lore dating back in time has them allied to the original humans in Strom before Stromgarde was founded. They helped build Dalaran with the humans. There's a long, long history of High Elves. And the fact of the matter is, many players who played with all of the Warcraft games really felt like Blood Elves were really shoehorned into the Horde, as Blizzard yourselves have admitted that they were given to the Horde so they would have a pretty race to help balance out faction numbers. Keep in mind, this is in the time before server transfers or before character swaps or any of that kind of stuff was possible. So I can understand why Blood Elves were given to the Horde at that time, knowing the faction imbalance and the server imbalance issues. However, with that said, when you introduce a system like allied races, the primary thing people are going to think of is the minor races that we interact with often and have seen throughout the lore of our stories and interactions, and people are going to want to play those characters, whether they be High Elves, or Ethereal, or Naga, or Vrykul, all races you haven't addressed or seem to not want to add for whatever particular reason. These are NPCs we have interacted with in the lore. People that want to play High Elves want to roleplay as a High Elf because they've seen High Elves and they've done quests for High Elves. They've done quests for the Silver Covenant in Wrath of the Lich King. They did quests for the Silver Covenant through Cataclysm. They did quests for the Silver Covenant with helping the Kirin Tor on the Isle of Thunder. I mean, it goes on and on. They're even in Legion all over the place. You see High Elf NPCs throughout Dalaran in Legion. If you go to the Alliance Inn, the NPCs there are flagged as Silver Covenant High Elf NPCs. This is why players want to play High Elves. It's for the lore aspect, not for the character models. Not to mention, if your argument is that they look too similar to Blood Elves to make them playable, that's a really, really weak argument, because one of the easiest things you can do is make character models look a little bit different. There's plenty of fan artwork out there, and I'm sure that Blizzard's artists, who are top of the industry, who are amazingly talented individuals, could have a field day with making High Elves look different from Blood Elves, as they did with Illyria, who clearly has a completely different theme. You'd never confuse her with a Blood Elf, that they could do with High Elves. So that's just, again, another really, really weak point in argument. So Ian, if what you say is true about your fear of blurring faction lines by adding the High Elves to the Alliance, although they're technically already part of the Alliance, they're just not playable for the Alliance, then why do you continue to expand on their NPCs and their story? Why did you choose to not integrate the Silver Covenant into the Void Elves, which would have made a heck of a lot more sense story-wise than making them Silvermoon City exiles and throwing them a new racial leader in Grand Magister Umbric, who doesn't even sound like a Blood Elf kind of name, so that kind of doesn't make sense. And then you have two of our major lore characters in Verisa and Illyria Windrunner, who are Alliance NPCs that are both High Elves that are pushing our story forward. You could argue Erator, although I know he's technically a half-elf, but in Battle for Azeroth, you're even expanding it, not just Legion. I mean, Yavera Dawning in the Warfront is a High Elf. So why add them? Why do you keep adding High Elf NPCs? Are you just trying to taunt the people that want High Elves? Or are you going to actually make them playable? Because what you're doing is kind of like putting salt into the wounds of the High Elf fans if you have no intentions of eventually adding them. And it seems almost spiteful to that crowd. And I can kind of understand where they're coming from.
But also there isn't a clear example of who or what High Elves are as a larger group that still remains in Azeroth. There's a couple that we just met Ilaria again for the first time, but they're not out there in the same way.
There isn't a clear example of what High Elves are. Maybe Ian never did any of the Silver Covenant questlines, and maybe he truly never played any of the Alliance storyline, but anybody that's played through that, there's a pretty clear indication of what High Elves are. At least there's a heck of a lot more of a clear indication of what High Elves are and what separates them from Blood Elves than what we knew about Draenei when they were introduced in the Burning Crusade. For those that might remember about Draenei back when they were introduced in the Burning Crusade, they weren't announced at the same time that Blood Elves were back at that BlizzCon. They weren't announced until very close to the release date of the Burning Crusade. Part of the reason was Blizzard was going to add Pandaren to the Alliance back then instead of the Draenei. Why? Because the Draenei didn't exist in the lore, they were completely created out of nothing, and they tied their story into the Broken, which was a race that we interacted with a little bit in Warcraft 2, but not a whole lot. I think there might have been a couple of spots in Warcraft 3 as well, and that's not even mentioning Void Elves either, who were just kind of thrown in there, and if you give me the story, Ian, that we learned about them on Argus when we were at Makari and doing the Seat of the Triumvirate, that really wasn't a story that really told us anything about Void Elves. That told us about the Void, that told us about Illyria Windrunner, that told us nothing about Void Elves. We did not interact with Grand Magister Umbric. We did not know that there was a group of Blood Elves who were tinkering with the Void. None of that. So that is not a good story either. So I guess my point is if they wanted to write them more into the story, there's plenty of foundation to say, Dalaran's now their home city. Maybe they kind of take that over and humans inhabit it as well, kind of like how there's High Elves in Stormwind in the Mage District. I mean, if you look around at the NPCs right now in Dalaran, you'll notice that almost none of them are Blood Elves, because they were all kicked out when Jaina was leading the Kirin Tor. If you look around at all the Kirin Tor NPCs, those are all High Elves. Point being, they could do something. There's something they could write with the lore if they so desired. I mean, let's be honest, Blizzard retcons left and right. Some of the stuff that they wrote in Chronicles 1 has already been retconned. So I just don't buy it.
And so we're looking to, when we add allied races, there's desire to have things be a bit more distinct, especially between the two factions, with the faction conflict being so prominent.
Then you shouldn't have given Nightborn to the Horde and Void Elves to the Alliance. You should have given the Nightborn to the Alliance and the Void Elves to the Horde.
And so the Void Elf angle, as tied into the story of Argus and the powers that Ilaria awakened and was able to train others to harness, I think was able to give something that felt a bit like a Blood Elf, but had a unique flavor of its own to the Alliance.
Except that Void Elves do not fit thematically with the Alliance whatsoever.
That said, obviously understand that if you love Alliance, you're an Alliance player, and you just want to be a fair-skinned, light-haired, blue-eyed elf.
Except that's not why people want High Elves. Those people that wanted that are playing Blood Elves right now, and they're happy.
Sorry? The Horde is there waiting for you?
Well, thank you, Ian, for giving the people who are flaming the High Elf supporters a great meme to just kind of throw it out at them whenever they want to now. I understand that what you're trying to do and what you're trying to say is trying to sound cute and funny and be kind of I don't know what that was. It just came off as condescending and snide. And when people say there's a horde favoritism at Blizzard, it's these kind of things they look back at and go, yep, there's a horde bias at Blizzard. Also, if the player base felt like they were already available and playable for them, they wouldn't be asking you for them. So consider that for a moment.
Eye color's not quite the same, but maybe there'll be contact lenses in the future. We never know. Anything's possible in the future, but no plans, I think, in the near term to add High Elves as an allied race.
So just to be clear, apparently using fel magic and fel crystals and messing with demons that corrupts your eye color and turns them green, kind of like how drinking the blood of Manoroth turned the orcs' skin green, really doesn't have an effect at all on your psyche, your mentality, your aggressiveness, although they did say that it did have an impact back in Burning Crusade. So apparently the same thing that qualifies Maghar as being different from the Azeroth orcs is not enough to make High Elves different from Blood Elves. So the important thing to take away from here is he says anything is possible in the future. So that means that High Elves are a potential allied race in the future, is what he's saying here. And I don't think anybody that is wanting High Elves is realistically expecting them directly after Void Elves. They just want to know that their voices are being heard and being considered, and Jeremy Fiesel did ask for the community's feedback on which allied races they would like to see as playable. So that's been given, and that's all this really is from the player base.
Sorry, I accept all of the hate mail that I'm about to get for this, but that's where we stand.
This is hashtag blame Ian.
My issue with Ian Hazacostas' response to the High Elf question is not so much that he thinks that High Elves shouldn't be playable or doesn't want them to be playable, it's the fact that he does not understand the game's lore. And that's okay if you don't understand the game's lore, but you probably shouldn't be answering lore-related questions if you don't know much about the given topic. For example, we wouldn't ask class design or balance-related questions to art director Chris Robinson. Why? Because that's not his forte. Well, the same is true with story and lore with Ian Hazacostas. For those who don't know much of the history of Ian Hazacostas, he is the guy who formed the website known as Elitist Jerks. It is the OG, the original theory crafting website. The reason that you're able to theory craft and simcraft today in World of Warcraft the way you do in hardcore raiding, that is due to Ian Hazacostas. Ian Hazacostas' main character is an orc shaman named Gurgthok, which if you were to type Gurgthok into Google, you'll see many of his old posts when he was still writing and theory crafting over at Elitist Jerks. But I think there's kind of something interesting here in understanding that Ian Hazacostas has mostly played through the Horde storyline. If you had not played through the Alliance storyline, you're not going to understand the High Elf story and why they're so integral to the Alliance and why they've been so integrated into our gameplay experience. If you're somebody who's paid attention to the lore and read the quest text for an Alliance character leveling from 1 to max level, you're going to have experienced that. If you're somebody who is focused primarily on playing Horde, or you're a passionate Horde fanboy, and you've never played Alliance, you're probably not going to understand the desire or why High Elves are even something that people want on the Alliance side. So I think that's important to understand when we think about the concept of where Ian Hazacostas' mind enters this whole High Elf, Blood Elf debate, and in relation to his answer on the topic. It's also important to state that when he says that's where we stand, that is where Ian stands, because there has been a couple of developers who have been in vocal support of the High Elves being playable. I certainly don't want to be pointing my finger and blame towards anybody, but lore should really be selecting better questions during these Q&As that are more specified towards Ian Hazacostas. If they're going to do a lore Q&A, maybe with somebody like Christy Golden, where we can sit down and ask those kind of questions, I think that those would be better fielded towards her than towards Ian Hazacostas. I understand that he's the game director, but that's just not his area of expertise, and it's not really his area where he really cares about, just like most Mythic Raiders don't care about allied races. Yeah, they're cool, but that's not really their primary concern. They care about class balance, they care about boss mechanics, and they care about things that affect their gameplay, and allied races are not one of those things. So to kind of conclude the video, High Elves are not, in fact, Blood Elves. The game makes that distinction, the story makes that distinction, the lore makes that distinction. Just because one of the developers on the development team does does not mean that High Elves are Blood Elves. Yes, Blood Elves were High Elves, but they no longer are. They're separated now. So, if you like this video, please follow, like, comment, subscribe. I've been Kind Death. Have a good day.